Welcome back to my channel, Famous and Fabulous. I get it that Lemmy got it before me. I miss him. He was a guy. He was such a good friend of mine. He wrote me a lot of songs. I'll tell about Let Me. For many years, Thelma Riley stayed hidden in the crazy story of Ozzy Osbourne. Fans knew her name as his first wife, but few knew how much she went through behind closed doors. Now, after years of staying quiet, she finally opens up, showing a twisted mess of fighting, lies, and craziness that made up their marriage and Ozzy's life. It was the kind of mess that felt less like a part of a love story and more like the beginning of Assad's story, where people watching already know there will be heartbreak long before the show ends. And just when the clapping stops and the theatre lights start to come on, we go back to the moment it all started, a moment that would lead to heartbreak. Picture the early 1970s. Black Sabbath was fighting its way to become the kings of heavy metal, and in the middle stood Ozzy Osbourne, a man who was both exciting and scary because you never knew what he'd do. When Ozzy first looked at Thelma, the sparks flew right away, like two fireworks going off in the dark. But so did the trouble, a storm building long before either of them saw the dark clouds. Behind the bright stage lights and the loud roar of packed crowds, Ozzy's fall had already started. Nights spent drinking whiskey and taking cocaine turned into days of angry mood changes and doing dangerous things. Thelma, still holding on to dreams of young love, got pulled into a whirlwind where sweetness could, without any warning, turn into explosive anger. Their Birmingham house might have looked normal and safe from the outside, but inside, it was like a pot ready to explode with broken promises and growing fear. Doors slammed like gunshots in the night. Fighting crackled through the air like lightning storms. Love was there, yes, but it was love that struggled under the heavy weight of drug problems, lies, and a man who was both her husband and her biggest fear. Ozzy's problems didn't stay locked behind the front door. They spilled into the streets, onto the stage, and right into the newspapers. His falls into alcohol and drugs weren't whispered secrets for long. They became open cuts for the world to see. Cameras caught him talking unclear through interviews, falling down hallways, or exploding in drunk, angry speeches that left helpers scrambling. Fans shared hushed, shocked stories of backstage fights, microphone stands thrown like weapons and bitter, fights that happened in front of surprised crew members. There were nights, sometimes whole stretches of nights, when he simply disappeared, swallowed by a blur of bright lights, dangerous strangers, and drugs that kept him spinning far from home. When he was around the king of guitar parts, I've never met anybody. I remember he said, "You ain't going to beat that one." But he would every time. Even in those early shooting star days, Ozzy seemed like a magnet for trouble. He could turn a creative talk into a battlefield within minutes. With Black Sabbath, fights over guitar parts, recording schedules, and money exploded like sudden storms, voices raised, fists sometimes almost flying. His unpredictability became both his legend and his curse. For Thelma, each public blow-up was a private knife, every screaming headline, a new scar of embarrassment she was forced to wear insolence. Ozzy's life was less a smooth career path and more a war zone covered with the broken pieces of ruined relationships. Every step forward seemed to step on a bomb, and the explosions were never far behind. Within Black Sabbath, anger simmered like a pot on the edge of exploding. Tony Iommi, the band's steady guitarist, had grown tired of Ozzy's wild work habits, always being late, and the fog of drugs that clouded his every practice. What started as creative disagreements often grew into roaring battles, with insults thrown across the studio like weapons. Bill Ward and Geezer Butler were pulled into the fighting more often than they wanted to remember. A simple disagreement over a bass line or drum pattern could start hours of yelling, accusations, and slammed doors. Band meetings sometimes felt less like talks about music and more like courtroom fights, each member taking turns as the one accusing and the one defending. But the feuds didn't end when Ozzy stepped outside the Sabbath circle. The rock world was a dangerous arena, and Ozzy seemed unable or maybe unwilling to avoid its many conflicts. Rivalry started over the smallest sparks. A sarcastic comment in an interview, a missed invitation to an after-party, or Arama whispered backstage. Jealousy and competition for the spotlight fed the flames until they raged out of control. Promoters accused him of being impossible to work with. Sound engineers got angry under his unpredictable demands and explosive mood swings. Journalists, who dared to criticize him, often found themselves getting a swear-filled angry speech or worse, permanently banned from his circle. The rock press fed hungrily on these clashes, making every fight bigger until they became part of Ozzy's story. His quick temper was both his armor and his weakness. He could not let insults, real or imagined, slip by without a fight. Old grudges were stored like trophies, ready to be taken down and dusted off whenever a new battle started. And as soon as one enemy was defeated or simply faded away, another seemed to come from the shadows, ready to take their place. In Ozzy's world, peace was something he didn't know. The war never truly stopped. It only moved to new place. The chaos didn't end with the music. It followed Ozzy home like a dark cloud. Inside the walls of their house, life was a tiring battleground where tensions simmered from sunrise to midnight. Thelma fought alone. She tried to raise their children, handling school runs, bills, and bedtime stories while their father disappeared for days or came back in a fog of drink and drugs. Despite the fame and money pouring in, there was a constant sense of instability. Tour earnings were wasted on wild parties, expensive trips, and self-destructive fun, leaving the family too scraped together. Resources for their real needs. Even the smallest home moment could turn into a storm. A quiet dinner might turn into a screaming match after a sudden mood swing. A gentle question could cause an explosion of rage. The children learned to walk quietly through the house, sensing the danger in their father's changing moods. Growing up in a home where love and fear lived together in uncomfortable silence. Every day was a tightrope walk over a pit of anger, with Thelma holding desperately to whatever pieces of normal life she could save. By the late 1970s, the cracks in Ozzy's life had widened into huge gaps. His personal and professional worlds weren't just shaking. They were falling apart in slow motion, like a building crumbling under its own weight. What had once been casual fun had changed into a hungry addiction that ate up everything in its path. Drugs and alcohol were no longer just ways of escape. They were the builders of his destruction. Night bled into day in a haze of chemical fog. His body beaten, his mind worn out, his temper quick to explode. On stage, he could be electric, sometimes happy, sometimes scary. But the unpredictability was as dangerous as it was exciting. One night, he was a magnetic showman. The next, he was barely able to think clearly, stumbling through lyrics, eyes glazed and empty. Off stage, he drifted into a private exile, unreachable event to those who cared enough to try. Friends spoke of long silences, interrupted only by bursts of rage or manic energy. For Black Sabbath, the breaking point finally came. In 1979, after years of tension and growing frustration, they kicked him out of every band he had helped to create. It was a brutal and embarrassing exile that took away his identity, leaving him drifting with no anchor, no structure, and most dangerously, no reason to stop. For Thelma, the news carried a cruel twist. In one sense, there was relief. No more all-night screaming matches with Sabbath's management. No more missed dinners. No more exhausting tug-of-war over his touring commitments. But that relief was poisoned almost instantly, without the band to keep him busy. Ozzy was suddenly home far more often, dragging the whirlwind with him. His moods were like mercury, one moment distant and withdrawn, the next explosive and destructive. He prowled the house like a restless spirit, fueled by a cocktail of paranoia, anger, and whatever drugs happened to be within reach. The marriage, already scarred and limping from years of neglect and betrayal, began to buckle under the relentless weight of mistrust and emotional exhaustion. Even the smallest disagreements became dangerous sparks in a room soaked with gasoline. Arguments erupted over small things: what to eat, who answered the phone, whether the curtains were drawn, and each one felt like it might burn the entire house down. The walls of their home, once witnesses to moments of tenderness and closeness, now absorbed the echoes of slammed doors, shouted accusations, and late-night breakdowns. Love still existed between them in pieces, but it was buried beneath layers of anger and self-destruction. By then, their home was no safe place. It was a battlefield where passion and fury clashed night after night, each fight leaving new scars that no apology could erase, and worn down. Both of them knew that the war they were fighting had no winner, only survivors. Eventually, the marriage could not be saved. There were no more second chances, no more late-night promises whispered through tears. Thelma walked away, her footsteps echoing like a final judgment in a trial that had dragged on for years. But the wounds she left behind were not neat cuts. They were jagged, open gashes carved deep into both their lives. This was no clean break. It was the violent tearing apart of two souls once joined by passion, now held together only by the leftover betrayal, mistrust, and bitter fights that had long crossed the line between love and war. For Ozzy, the end was less a turning point than a free fall. Stripped of the fragile anchor Thelma had provided, he gave himself fully to the abyss. Nights blurred into mornings under the sickly glow of club lights and hotel corridors. The parties were endless, a merry-go-round of strangers, drugs, and noise designed to drown out the silence that scared him most. His excesses grew beyond even the wild standards of the rock and roller light. The stunts became more reckless, the outbursts more violent. There were hotel rooms destroyed in fits of rage, dangerous confrontations with strangers and friends alike, and public meltdowns so erratic that even his most devoted defenders began to run out of excuses. The scandals grew darker, stranger. Each headline, another brick in the wall closing around him. Tabloids feasted on every twisted detail, crafting the image of Ozzy Osbourne as both the ultimate wild rock god and a tragic figure spiraling toward oblivion. Every drunken stumble, every bizarre incident only seemed to cement his legend, even as it chipped away at the man behind it. The music still roared, but it was fueled by chaos, not creation. And then came the erasing. Thelma speaks now. Her words are not just an attempt to reopen the wounds of the past. They are an unflinching autopsy of a man she once loved. A man the world thought they knew. Because the truth, as she tells it, is that Ozzy's greatest battles were never against his bandmates, rivals, or the relentless press. They were fought alone in the dark with no audience and no applause. Every single day, he was locked in a brutal, unforgiving war against himself. And no matter how loud the music played, the echoes of that war never stopped. It would be easy to think that this was the end of the story, a clean fade to black after years of chaos. But Ozzy's tale did not end in silence. What followed was a dizzying blend of triumph and turmoil, a life that defied both logic and survival. Against all odds, he carved out a solo career that didn't just succeed. It exploded, making him a cultural icon whose name would echo through the halls of rock history. He stood before stadiums of screaming fans, his voice still a battle cry, his presence larger than life. Yet every ovation was paid for in blood, sweat and scars no spotlight could hide. Behind the roar of the crowd lay a battlefield invisible to most. Vicious feuds with managers over fortunes won and lost. Catastrophic fallouts with collaborators who could no longer bear the storm of his moods, and legal wars that drained his spirit as much as his bank account. Family reunions often turned into tense, knife-edge standoffs, while friendships evaporated as quickly as his fleeting moments of sobriety. And always, there was that unspoken truth. Thelma knew it better than anyone that behind the outrageous headlines, and the snarling rock god persona stood a man locked in constant combat, not only with the world, but with himself, fighting wars on every front until his final and most devastating enemy turned out to be the face in the mirror.